I'm Ralph Preston, and welcome to another Stroke Buddies Stroke Survivor Support Group meeting. My friends Mitch Raymond and John Kopia and I are back again, and tonight we're going to discuss how to get the most out of your physical therapist or occupational therapist or therapists in general. And we're all three survivors. I'm a stroke survivor, so is Mitch. John is a TBI survivor, so he certainly understands the whole process as well. Mitch is also a PT, and John is also an occupational therapist, and I'm not any kind of therapist. So the only perspective I can really provide is my experience as a survivor interacting with therapists. So, the question is, you get limited amount of time with your therapist before you're discharged. And Mitch, what are your thoughts on how to get the most out of your therapist in your interactions?
Well, what I always tell my clients, especially my fellow stroke survivors that are clients, is your overarching goal should to be to become your own therapist because you're not going to be able to be with me forever. And when it comes to certain insurances like Medicaid and stuff, they'll give us like maybe 8 visits or 5 visits or 6 or something like that. And we really have to do our best to give our clients the best information and the best guidance that we can. So what helps us out a great deal is to really get the individual to kind of open up their scientific minds and really explore the hows and the whys behind what we teach them as therapists. Um, and the more I always encourage my clients to say, the more questions you ask, the better you're going to be able to understand what I'm doing with you, and the better you're going to own what I do with you. And you if you approach physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy and just like, oh, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, and just kind of half-ass it, if you will, it's not going to be as beneficial, and you will forget what you're taught, and then you'll be kind of left out in the ether of care. So use your first experience or your whatever experience you have with a therapist to be an inspirational experience, an experience to kind of launch off from, and really establish a foundation to start from, but not only a foundation to start from, but how to progress. And most insurances will allow you to go back every year to do another round. And in that case, the therapist will do another evaluation. They'll establish your baseline at that point and teach you how to launch off again. But however, if you get really good at it, therapy, sometimes you don't even need that, and you can just tinker. Like I, as a stroke survivor, I still have a weak right hand with spasticity, and I've gotten to the point where I don't really go to therapy anymore for my own stroke deficits, because I'm constantly experimenting, I'm constantly tinkering, constantly playing, and that's what I try to inspire my fellow you know um stroke survivors to do, is to play, spur up their curiosity, and to just try to encourage them to maybe do a little bit of their own research and come back and discuss with me, or um eventually just go off on their own and just go hog wild, go wherever the research and wherever your tinkering leads you, and just really play around with your stroke affected deficits and see where you can get to. Um, so I guess that's my perspective. I'll just kind of put where I'm from first in terms of my practice. I am from inpatient. I started out in inpatient, and then I've done about equal 6 years in inpatient and 6 or 7 years in home care. And that's where I am at now, home care. And so how much time usually that I have patients with patients is governed by their progress, as well as whether or not they're homebound. What does homebound mean? Homebound means it takes a considerable and taxing effort to leave the home. You usually need some form of assist or guarding or supervision. You cannot leave the home independently, and uh, you're able to go to special events like a doctor's appointment or religious, like going to church or going to a special family event, but those events are very rare, and usually you're stuck at home. That's homebound status. So what I do as a home care therapist is I move patients beyond homebound status, so that they can get out and live their lives in the community, and hopefully eventually transition to outpatient physical therapy. And that's where John comes in. So John, go ahead and say your piece about your perspective as an OT, outpatient, that sort of thing.
Okay. Thanks. I started out in skilled nursing, but for over the last 20 years, I've been in outpatient therapy. And people coming in from home care and going into outpatient therapy, what I'd have to say is when people come in with certain ideas and goals and things they want to accomplish, it's always better. And I think that's just the way life is. If we know what we're looking for and what we want to accomplish, then we have some sort of direction. It's so easy to get caught up in, okay, I'm going to a therapist and relying on what they're saying and do this exercise, follow this procedure, do this. And I think a lot of stroke survivors and patients in general forget that they have a lot of say in that ultimately it's their goal. It's what they want to accomplish. They know their limitations. They know what they can do at home and what they can't do at home. And just doing an exercise or an exercise routine from an OT standpoint, that's not functional. It will help people get better. But ultimately, if I just did a bunch of push-ups every night, that's not going to help me to be able to do a lot of things in life, I guess. And we really need to address the function aspect of it from a standpoint of going to a therapist and focusing on what we want out of therapy. So in that regard, if we don't look at the therapist as, oh, they're going to get me better. And exactly what Mitch said, it's about teaming up. Sorry, messed up there. It's about teaming up and learning for yourself, taking charge of what you want to do. And unfortunately, and this is what I tell a lot of survivors, a lot of patients, is when people come into the clinic, you're kind of forced into this club and you're forced into learning certain things. Because if I'm trying to become a better race car driver, I need to know how the car works. I need to be able to give feedback about the car. And it's the same thing with the human body. If the more we understand what's going on, and it can be basics, oh, this muscle contracts or shortens and it makes the wrist bend. Well, just understanding that and where it's located and why we're tight can take you a long way in your rehabilitation process and in your day-to-day functional life. Understanding why and how and ultimately how to change.
Okay. Well, oh, Mitch, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback on top of what John was saying, and then I definitely want John's input based on what I'm saying here. Uh, I think it's very important as a therapist to train the individual how I break stuff down and build it back up to a functional mobility task. So I'm constantly telling them that, this is a story, And each therapy session, like for example, I had a client today that we started out with standing therapeutic exercises where I shifted her from right to left, doing various ranges of motion, just to prime up the muscles. Then I had the individual do slow motion Tai Chi walking, extremely slow, in a kitchen, and the kitchen had an island on one side and a countertop on the other, so those are like parallel bars. And I had her do slow motion walking, keeping the knees bent, teaching her the importance of that, teaching her how to weight shift and balance on one before stepping with the other, and permitted her to hold on to the countertop a little bit intermittently as they walked. And then I taught the individual how to do it in normal stride, in step wide push off fashion, as they walk the length of their house indoors. And then we start for the first time integrated arm swing, and teaching them. And in the beginning, this patient struggled. They tried to step forward with the left leg and swing the left arm forward at the same time. Basically, I call that the Tin Man walk. And from Wizard of Oz, if you guys don't know my reference. But and then after that, like, I started to hold on to her hand and synchronize the swing with her as if I was holding her hand during the walk, and she got really good at that. And then we went outside, like, but this is a whole storyline. This is everything builds up from little components, subcomponents, up to the functional task. And to train the client on how that happens is very important, because if they're going to be their own therapist, in my opinion, they need to be able to do that to some degree, some level. And so I would love John's input, because I'm sure you John do a ton of this, right?
Yeah, I love exactly what you said, because analyzing, and going through school, it's a task analysis. Break everything down. What muscles are involved? What range of motion is involved? And essentially, that's what therapists are doing with their clients. Is they understand the anatomy, which is referring back to what Mitch was talking about, learning about yourself, learning about your body, and understanding so that you can become your own therapist. Once you have that baseline understanding, therapists will break down a task and say, okay, what am I doing now? I'm weight shifting to this leg so I can lift up this leg. You don't have to know, oh, it's this muscle, this muscle, this muscle, but getting that brain in the mood, if you will, in understanding what's involved is the bare essential of getting better for anything, any sport. I mean, think of football, baseball. They break every single thing down to the nth degree and then fine tune everything. And that's essentially what therapists do, and what a survivor is forced to do to progress.
Yeah. And just think about mechanics, folks. I'm going to do two examples. For example, sit to stand. So if I want someone to optimize their mechanics for sit to stand, I have to move their center of mass closer to the base of support. I have them scoot forward to the edge of the chair. I have them flex both knees so their feet are more underneath them. Then I have them lean forward, nose beyond the toes, to create counterbalance to the pelvis. So the pelvis lifts up as their head goes down. And of course, they're pushing off from the arms of the chair, and they stand up. So that's mechanics in terms of sit to stand. And I'll do one mechanic breakdown for OT that I could think of. Hand mechanics. If someone has spasticity and their hand is like this, their grip is going to be extremely weak. Like, I dare any one of you with your good hand to try to hold on to a jar or a can or something when your wrist is bent like this. You have more strength when the wrist is slightly extended. So explaining those mechanics is really important in understanding them, those mechanics. Yes, anatomy is really important, but understanding the kinematics and kinesiology just conceptually really helps. John, do you have another kind of mechanic breakdown from a functional task that you can think of?
I think you nailed it right on the head, especially with what we call tenodesis. You can see exactly like when I lift up my wrist, my fingers want to curl. And people who have spinal cord injuries at a certain level, they don't have grip. So they actually have to use that mechanics of bringing their wrist back in order to hold something. And so just understanding that there are easier ways through mechanics, through keeping tissue stretched out, is very essential. And it all goes back to Mitch's point of becoming your own therapist. And the only way you become your own therapist is through understanding and not putting the whole concept of therapy up on a pedestal, but to actually, the survivors, people, your body. And I like to refer it to the flesh suit. You know your own flesh suit, you know your own limitations, and at the same time, you kind of know what you need. So don't put the whole concept of therapy on a pedestal. Go into therapy, go into home care, go into outpatient therapy, knowing what you want. All right. If you just passively take on what a therapist has for you, then they're going to run you through a routine that is practiced in their mind, practiced in their head. It's going to make their world easier. It's just a human condition. But if you go in with specific goals and what you need, then the therapist is pretty much forced to tailor things towards your goals. And that's where you have the power. The clients, the patients, they have the power and they don't really know it. All right, to a certain degree. And if they take charge, then that really also motivates the therapist, where it's like, oh, you have these goals. I just got this home program. I go home and I do it and I come back, like Ralph said. And wow, the therapist will notice change because, believe it or not, therapists see how many people don't do anything. So when someone actually does something and they come back to the clinic, boom, it's like a school teacher knowing when the child actually does their homework and they practice that. It's blaringly obvious.
Go ahead, Mitch.
You can actually help a therapist to customize your routine by sharing your interests, by sharing your background. Because if we know your interests and background, we can tailor what we do with you to those interests and background. And if it's more individual and meaningful to you, that is going to help your neuroplasticity in that brain of yours so much. I mean, we've talked about this on Ralph's channel before, how important what you do being meaningful is just to the nth degree important, and the therapist can help you with that if you share that sort of individuality. And in my opinion, a good therapist will try to get to know your background a little bit. What was your prior occupation? What did you used to like to do for recreation before your stroke? What are your interests now? That sort of thing. Especially with regard to OT, right, John?
Oh yeah, it's really about the relationship, and just like what you're talking about. When someone expresses an interest and they give you a background about what they do, and you can create this relationship where you're bouncing ideas back and forth. Now you have engaged the therapist. Now they're more likely to customize things and forced to customize things because you have these goals, and it's going to make it ultimately easier for the therapist when you have these goals. It's not just like generally like, oh, I would like, someone to walk this distance or whatever. It becomes black and white, bland. They're going to be working on the same old thing. And I've worked with countless therapists over the years, and it's like anything. There's going to be people that go to work, do their job, punch the clock, go home. And it's really, to get the most out of your therapist is just like, how do you get the most out of your friend? You go out and you do things, you create a relationship, you share interests. And it's going to be the same thing with the therapist. If you show interest and you show motivation and you ask questions, you're going to be forcing the therapist to work at a higher level, and they're more likely to give you more insights, and you're likely to get more things out of it overall.
Okay. I don't know if I can remember all the things I thought of while you guys were talking, but here goes. I realized early on that nobody was going to make me better, that it felt to me. I don't quite know how I arrived at that, but I arrived at it very early, and that was very good for me. I now preach about a relationship with a therapist and practicing at home and whatever. But from the get-go, I told all my therapists exactly what you were talking about, Mitch. I said, I'm a visual learner. If you show me, then I can do it. And what I prefer to do is have you show me, let me repeat it, and then you tell me if I'm doing it right, correct me, or say that's good. I also told them right off the bat, and this is just my nature, the visual learner part, and I am not motivated to do what you want me to do if I don't understand it. So I said right away, you need to explain to, I guess I was already figuring out that I had to be my own physical therapist. I got actually 30 visits, but that was 16 years ago. You're lucky to get that many now. And I also found out that my insurance company would only I got 30, well, I got 29 of each because you have to do an initial evaluation. If I went to OT the same day I went to PT, they only counted as one. So I made sure.
Not anymore.
I know.
That's one of the loopholes they closed.
Yeah, right. Well, I took advantage of it.
Good.
So I told my therapist, I have to understand this because well, I'm just not motivated. The other thing was I was basically trying to figure out what the building blocks were for establishing my own home program and getting better after. I guess I realized that it was, stroke's kind of a lifetime event. And even if you get 30 or 58 like I got, it's still not enough. You talk about specific goals. I had my wife bring my camera into therapy on like day 2 or day 3. And I showed them, I said, here's the lens. I couldn't make a C with my hand at that point, but I said, I need to make a C and be able to rotate it in order to operate cameras. So, and they started immediately, day 3 or 4, they started showing me the exercises to do that specific task. It didn't take away from the other things that they were trying to do, like get my fingers moving, which really weren't, or raising my arm or anything like that. So, yeah, and I found in my initial therapy and more so in follow-up therapies that basically I use the piano teacher analogy. Somebody used school teacher. If you don't practice, the therapist knows, the piano teacher knows. You don't get any better. You don't get better going to therapy once a week for 45 minutes. Well, you can, especially in the early days, there's some spontaneous healing, but we're talking about, being in for the long haul here. So it's important to do your homework. And I found that when I would do my homework, that the therapist would know. And I think you guys can answer this better than me, but my observation was that when I did my homework, I didn't never not do it, so I don't really have a comparison. I had really strong relationships with the therapist because of that. In fact, what I did at the end of I didn't try to take over control of the therapy session because I thought that would be rude, but I gave them the way I learned and some goals. And then, I asked for homework. And so I would say, okay, give me the homework. And I would demonstrate it and say, is that right? They would say, yep. And then when I got home, I would do it a bunch of times just to lock it into muscle memory, which is really brain memory. I don't know why we use that term. And then I would do it during the week, go back in and demonstrate. If you can't do something one week and you go back the next week and you do it, that impresses your therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll I'll stop now. Go ahead, Mitch.
One of the analogies that I usually give my clients is I tell them that I'm not the boss. I am not your boss. I'm not your dictator. I'm not here to tell you or order you around. I am more your coach and you are my athlete. And we are going to work together to break down where you are having difficulty so that you can perform more optimally, and improve, because that's the job of a coach, and that's very much the job as a therapist as well, is to work together to get stuff done. One of the things I also tell my clients is I could be the best therapist in the world, but if you are not going to put in the effort and put in the work and really try to go to that next level, I can't help you. Like the worst case scenario, I had once had a client that wouldn't get out of bed. She did a few exercises in the bed, but she wouldn't sit up in the edge of the bed and she wouldn't stand up. I had to discharge her because I couldn't work with that. I couldn't improve her if she didn't want to get out of bed.
You run out of goals really quick.
Right.
Real quick.
Yeah. And I mean, everything, all this is valuable, I think. And I really liked what Ralph had said. Nobody's going to get you better except for yourself. And I think the way healthcare is these days is people are used to a surgery to fix it or medication to fix it. And then people have a stroke and they might never have heard of a stroke. And so they're like, okay, so what do I do to fix this? And so in some sort of subconscious way, we're waiting for the answer. We're waiting for that magic bullet. And we've been conditioned for that in this healthcare system, this modern healthcare system. And coming to the reality of there is no magic bullet is a huge pill to swallow. And that's where I see sometimes people will actually start to regress in therapy because all of a sudden they come to this reality. And there's a group of people that will come to this reality of like, oh, wow, this is lifelong and I'm not getting better unless, I do something about it and there's no magic bullet. And so some people will take that on as a challenge, and some people will kind of sink back and get somewhat depressed. And from an OT standpoint, we kind of work on that social emotional aspect. And one thing that I've always said to clients on an outpatient level is, I understand the trauma of the whole event it's a life change. It's like boom, at one point your life was this certain way and then all of a sudden everything changed. So one thing I would say to every stroke survivor is if you want to take a time out and work on you and kind of swallow this pill, it's understandable. Just keep your tissue loose. That way it's just like keeping that car oiled, that you're going to move and you're going to restore at some point, but you got to keep that engine oiled and everything loose so that when you go back to it, you haven't lost anything. And that's probably the biggest gold nugget or pearl of wisdom that I have as far as that's concerned. But taking the bull by its horns, if you will, and taking charge of yourself, learning, being engaged in exercises, the therapist knows, and then the therapist is more likely to want to help you because ultimately therapists got into this field to help people. And when you run across clients, patients that really everybody's going to say they want help because they do, but there's a difference when someone needs it. It's just like I use this comparison a lot in outpatient. There's a group of people that want to play guitar, which is almost everybody. And then there's a group of people that need to play guitar. And the people that need to play guitar are the people that actually learn how to do it in some capacity. And it's the same thing for stroke survivors or any sort of survivor of any sort of traumatic injury. If you need to get better, everybody wants to get better. But if you need to get better on some level, then you're going to figure out how.
All right, Mitch, go ahead, and then I want to reinforce a couple points.
Okay. What John is saying is very true, and what can help that is harnessing a passion. He says you need to play the guitar. Okay, well, if you need to play a guitar, that's a passion. Okay. So if a golden nugget from my perspective is if you can help share with your with your therapist or therapists plural your passions and what really makes life worth living for you, then you can they can cater those goals or customize those goals to those passions, and that's very powerful. That it will make you work harder because that's your passion. That's what you live life for. um take let's see if I can figure out a passion that I worked towards when I was a kid. Oh, soccer. I started out complete flaccid paralysis on my right side. I had already gone like in pre-K, got introduced to soccer and I got the soccer bug, and I really wanted to get back on the soccer field. So I basically shared that with my parents and my therapists, and eventually they got me back on the soccer field. I needed to wear a bike helmet to protect my brain surgery area, and they knew I couldn't run around very much because I had an AFO or ankle foot orthosis on my right lower leg and foot. So they trained me to be goalie.
Huh.
Okay.
Hmm.
So that was my segue or step into uh like athletically, functionally, whatever, being on the soccer field and pursuing my passion is to start off with goalie, and then I progressed to defense.
All right, I got a couple things. That's interesting. I wanted to play soccer and I wasn't great, and so I played goalie because I got to play all the time. Nobody wanted to be goalie.
Yeah.
Same way with Little League, I was the catcher because I could hit okay, I could field okay, but if you want to play, anyway. The two things I'd like to reinforce were you said something. I missed one thing in my therapy, but you guys mentioned it, Mitch mentioned it, and I learned it pretty quick. So I'd like to reinforce it to the audience, and that is it's really important to break things down and then put them back together. I can't tell you how important this is. I mean, they used to give me the sheets and stuff like that, or show me stuff, or I'd find stuff, and I'd go, all right, it was what I call guy thinking. Okay, I have to do this entire thing and I have to do it perfectly. Well, like walking, there are about like 30 or 40 pieces to it. And there's just no way that you can, learn to do a sit to stand, and you can't walk and you stand up and you're going to be able to do 30 or 40 things perfectly, like right out of the box. So I learned that that was wrong. I called it cheating in my brain. Oh, well, I have to do it perfectly because otherwise I'm cheating. And I thought I wouldn't get there if I cheated and didn't do the whole thing right. But I quickly learned that that was not possible. And I quickly learned to break things down kind of on my own. And that's going to lead me to my second point. And Mitch, you also said this one earlier. Um, I got a question for everything, and I noodle around. So just like you do with your hand, and so I would just try different things and see what happened. And if you can learn body awareness, not everybody is born with it. I had a fair amount before I had my stroke, and that served me well. But the more you can pay attention to your body and noodle around, fool around, try different things, see what works, adapt. I'm also a big adapter. So break things down, noodle around, pay attention, adapt what you're doing, and figure out how to put them back together for you. Your therapist can help you with this, but they're not there when you're trying to learn how to kick that foot out in your walk. And the whole thing about learning how to walk again is you're generally working on half a dozen things. You can't work on all 30 or 40, and I tended to work on more than one. Well, because certain things like you move that leg out, you want to make sure you hit with the heel. You want to make sure you do a good roll through and big strong push off the toe, and that's all. That's 3 or 4 things, but it's part of one process. So I just want to reinforce those couple of things. Go ahead, Mitch.
Eventually, you need to work towards flow.
Slow?
Flow,
Flow. Okay.
FLOW. So let's say there's all those 30 plus things in gait, in walking. All right. That's great. But if you try to think about all those things as you're doing the task of walking, you're gonna be sloppy, you're gonna fall apart. So work on the components, but eventually you want to flow. You want to just let things happen. Because that's tough. I know that's tough, but that's where a good therapist will teach you all the component parts, but then tell you at the end, of the session or whatever, as you advance, just okay, you see this task, this is what I want you to do it. Don't overthink it, just do it. Because the more you overthink it, the more you hold your breath, you wince, you whatever, it's going to kick up spasticity, or it's going to just, your mechanics are going to be all wrong if you strain to do it. Just do the best you can. Don't judge it, and just flow with it. John, you probably do that, right, John?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's first, you take parts of the whole or break it down like Ralph was talking about, and then you try as much as you can to perfect the little parts. Nothing's ever perfect. I would say practice makes progress, not perfection. And you take all these little parts and they enable you to flow, because now the brain's like, oh yeah, I know what comes next. Oh yeah, I know what comes next. And it's just as you practice an activity, it's the pieces that you've already developed start to click together. And that's how I picture flow happening.
Well, getting rid of the overthinking is also a difficult one. It's part of the flow. I mean, those are, getting into a flow and doing things smoothly, and stopping the overthinking.
But let me interrupt 1 second.
Sure.
The overthinking can be reframed as a positive aspect of it. We can get drowned in our overthinking. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But overthinking it means the brain's engaged, the brain's in the mood. And what the unique part about humanity is, we have an organ that's called a brain. We have a heart. That's another organ. Well, part of the human brain is we have this mind. All right. And someone says, okay, where's your mind located? All right. And without getting too philosophical, the modern neuroscience really breaks it down and says the mind controls what the brain is doing. And Dr. Dan Siegel breaks down the definition of the brain as an organ that processes and directs information flow. And so just from a pure standpoint of the brain processing all this information and redirecting it and all this other stuff, think of your mind. And when you go to therapy and you're engaging with a therapist, you're getting fed information to the mind. Now you need to take that information and train your brain, train your body, train all the organs, train your flesh suit. And what you want, your deficits, all your problems, all these other things. And by using our brain, but the brain being directed by the mind, that's when change happens. If we sit there and passively just, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do shoulder flexion, or I'm going to lift up my arm like this. Okay, what else does this exercise sheet say? Okay, I'm going to do this. That doesn't really translate into meaning. Mitch?
Yeah. And that doesn't translate into meaning. So you need to ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Bar none, that's one of the most important things all of you need to do. Okay, you have all these exercises. Why the heck am I doing them? Why is this one important? Why is that one important? How does this one and that one apply to whatever I'm working towards? What functional task is helped by this one or that one? It's very important to be able to link up each of what you work on to whatever functional task you want to pursue. Or functional tasks like a ADL or activity of daily living, or instrumental activity of daily living, or a functional mobility task, sit to stand, walking, floor transfer, getting up from the floor. Um, it's If you don't know the why and you're just doing it for the sake of doing it, yeah, you may be able to improve some range of motion, you may be able to improve from some strength, but you're not going to be able to make that network to be able to move towards that flow that we're talking about. The other thing that I want to mention is, John mentioned the mind. Okay, there's a big component of stroke rehab called mental imagery. And so what I tell my clients, is, they're going to get physically tired, and that's okay. So when they're physically tired, but they still want to work on stuff, they don't need to physically move. They can map out and break down what they're working on, and just think through the steps to get to that functional task, whether it be reaching up for a cup in the cupboard, or whether it be doing a sit to stand or walking. They can close their eyes and kind of mentally rehearse through the motor plans of each of these tasks they're working on, and that in that of itself is also going to help. Because again, you got to remember that your stroke was not to your hand, it was not to your leg. If you have double vision, it wasn't to your eyes. If you have aphasia, it wasn't to you, to your speech or your ability to talk. It was to your brain. So the more that you can use mental imagery during those off periods so that you're not physically doing something, the more it's going to reinforce what you're working towards.
Yes, and to back that up, I invite everybody to check out the Discovery Channel. Has the training of the Navy SEALs Bud's team. I don't remember exactly what it is, but one of the things they accentuated during that is when they do underwater training and they're underwater, and one of the last tests to pass is someone goes in down there and messes with them. They pull off the mask, they turn off the oxygen, they pull out the respirator. All these things are happening while they're underwater. And they say the only way they're able to pass that is they go through like hundreds of thousands of times in a way, or thousands of times, what they do in this situation. If this happens, then I do this. This happens, then I do this. That way, that whole motor pattern is already there, and they don't jump into their emotional brain and say, "Oh no!" And now they're nervous. They need more oxygen to their muscles. It's like, okay, this happened, I do this. This happened, I do this, and it's all because of mental imagery. And they've shown, and I know Mitch knows as well, they've shown on functional MRIs that the brain changes and the brain turns on according to where our mind is directing our thoughts. And so it is absolutely proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can change your brain through intention and attention. And if you're directing your thoughts and your brain to do these certain things, there's going to be some brain change, even if it's years later.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up mental imagery, because Mitch, because I think it's real important. I think you can also do it while you're doing passive movement. I encourage people who are doing passive movement to, imagine. I think one thing I would add to that is belief. If you believe, it's important to also believe that you can get there. And you were talking about putting the building blocks back together and understanding everything. That was the reason. If I figured if I had to be my own physical, well, I'm curious by nature, and I kind of have to understand everything. But I figured if I had to become my own physical therapist and take this on, I needed to understand how everything related to everything else, so that it made sense to me, so that I could put it back together. So go ahead, Mitch.
Focus, distraction, Those are two things you folks need to think about when you're doing therapy. I've been doing physical therapy on myself for 35 years, and I've done some hand stuff that while I'm watching TV, and then I've done it when I'm truly focused and when I don't have the TV on, and I am able to not be distracted. Distraction is something that you really have to avoid in stroke rehab, and almost anybody, even if you're not a stroke survivor, minimizing distraction, if you're trying to really link up your central nervous system to your body and be able to move better, distraction, you got to minimize that. You want to work on way as you're doing stuff at home, minimize distraction, work on ways to increase your focus so that you can get the most out of what you are working on.
For anybody who doesn't know it, multitasking is a myth. The brain processes one thing at a time. People who say they're okay at multiprocessing, they're okay at like switching out the one task that their brain performs and taking on another one, going back to the first. But the brain operates on one thing at a time. So that's why focus and distraction, I think, opinion here. That's why I think being focused and not being distracted are key. So I'm glad you brought those up. Gosh, there's a million things here. I heard slow earlier because sometimes slow is better than fast. And I heard that because I learned the hard way that form is the most important thing. You train for form. You never train for speed. Speed comes with form. A lot of people want to get back to walking a certain amount of miles per hour or whatever. Well, the way to do it is to work on your form, and it will come with you walking better than if you go and just go, like I did, go out peg-legged and learn how to walk 3 miles like Chester on Gunsmoke. Go ahead, Mitch.
Just to really drive that point home that Ralph just said, I'm sure you've all have seen cartoon flip books, right? You have that flip book, you do it real fast, and the cartoon goes real fast, and if you have that same image with less frames, it will go super fast, right? So this is the way I think about slow versus fast. If you try to go fast as you are trying to do something you're working on range of motion wise, then your brain is skipping to different parts of the motion and not seeing the full motion, not analyzing the full motion throughout its entire range. It's only seeing like skipped segments. But if you work on slowing things down as you're working on those ranges of motion, that's like taking a flip book of a cartoon doing a certain thing and having like so many more frames per second, and your brain can see segment by segment by segment of moving the hand or whatever you're working on through that range of motion, and that enhances your brain's ability to know how to do that motion and how to control that motion.
You know what my brain's thinking about right now? Slow Tai Chi walking.
Right. Absolutely. And I actually read some studies on how Tai Chi really helps with balance. And the
Oh, it
reason
does.
why, yeah, it's been clinically proven that Tai Chi helps with balance. And the reason why that is exactly what I told you about, which is, the slowness of motion, the challenging of single leg stance intermittently, like in just your brain is really just wrapping its entire neurology around your motion and really getting in touch with it, because it can study. It's not skipping phases of the motion. It's able to see the entire range of motion, whatever a pattern that you practice.
Right. If you can do it slow, then you're much more likely to be able to do it fast. And I can tell you that, they've done studies and whatever, but I can also tell you that I'm get involved in a personal study. Tomorrow I'm going to my 13th Thursday in a row taking Tai Chi. I learned through yoga, starting with chair yoga and then holding on the back of the chair, and then actually having the chair hold me back from being able to let go of the chair. So I pushed it away. And I got in yoga to where I can do this standing poses without the chair, from not being able to do the adapted ones in the chair hardly. And so, we've part of my mission has been to bring adaptive yoga to stroke survivors because I think it's important. And I finally found a Tai Chi teacher. It's something I knew would be beneficial. I did Qigong before my stroke. And so I've taken it, tomorrow will be 13 Thursdays in a row. And I'm here to tell you, it's made a difference in my balance. And what do? I adapt what the teacher does. And I'm working with the teacher because we're trying to figure out like what I do and how to adapt it so we can make a pathway for people to take it from the chair to the behind the chair to no chair. And in the beginning we would move our arms up slow and raise our heels at the same time. Well, I couldn't raise my heels. If I raised my heels and put my arms up, I had two kinds of forward motion. I felt I was going to fall on my nose. But so I used a little bit of mental imagery and a little bit of heel raising. So I imagine I'm raising my heels and I just lifted them a little bit, as much as I could. I got the arm motion down. And then as weeks have progressed, my heels are coming up almost as high as the teachers now. So it's like anything though in recovery, it's repetitions, it's working at it, it's not giving up, it's believing in yourself. I mean, all these things, are true. So
If I can
sure.
join in and reinforce what you guys are saying, what I'm repetitively hearing is attention, intention, and focus. And that is the formula for brain change according to modern neuroscience. Wherever we direct our attention, intention, and focus is the message of where to change. And the brain does not discriminate what information we're telling it. It's going to change according to where we direct our focus, attention, and intention. And that's really what in getting the most out of your therapist, ultimately by us or the therapist, or rather the survivor, directing the attention and intention and focus. That's how they're going to get the most out of therapy. And that might be directing the therapist, what goals they're working on, and things like that. And one point that we haven't brought up yet that I think is incredibly valuable, and I think a lot of people forget, is just because you go to one therapist doesn't mean that's the therapist for you. It's very important to realize that the client or the patient does have the ability and the choice to try out other therapists. And that one therapist is not the end all. They might, you might come back around and be like, you know what? That first therapist I had was really good, but maybe you just weren't ready for that information or that knowledge or that challenge just yet. But, just like any sort of personal trainer or cognitive behavioral therapist where you go and speak with somebody, it doesn't mean that you click with that person. There has to be some sort of relationship, on this other social level. And, maybe that therapist is having a bad day or two, but you get that gut feeling and if they're in it to win it. And that's reiterating back to what Ralph and Mitch said, when the client or the patient really wants it and they're involved, it motivates the therapist, and it becomes this give and take relationship like any relationship in life.
Well, not all, any two people don't necessarily click. And, I got on this neuro thing. So I was always looking for, the neuro approach. And I found that going to different therapists to get different perspectives, put the whether you click or not thing aside. And, I accidentally got assigned to the wrong therapist because they had the same name, Aaron Brown. One was a female and one was a male. And a couple weeks in, he said, I'm not a neuro. And I said, oh, okay, but things are going well. What happens if things don't go well? He said, I'll find you a neuro if you want. And I'm here to tell you that I may have learned more from him just because of his approach and the way we hit it off than I did from some of the neuro PTs. And if you're unhappy with your PT, unless you live out in the middle of nowhere like I did, I was unhappy with my outpatient PT. And it would have meant that I couldn't drive at the time. And I had a friend who was taking me to therapy, and the next closest one was an hour away. So I didn't really have a choice. But if you're in a city and you're at a clinic where there are multiple therapists and you're not getting along with yours, you've got the right. In fact, you have a responsibility to yourself to move on and ask for another therapist. Mitch,
Yeah,
looked like
avoid those cookie cutter therapists. Avoid the ones that just give you a general program and don't explain anything.
right. I say, you're in trouble when they get out the book and go by the book.
Yeah.
Or when they don't know what to do. And I've had several therapists. I've asked this to half a dozen therapists, 3 or 4, maybe not half a dozen. And it came from a therapist. A therapist once told me, your therapist is one who can often plateau you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I've seen it with colleagues as well. And going back to what Mitch was talking about as far as oh, I lost my train of thought there. Hold on.
Cookie cutter therapists.
Yeah, but right before that, oh man. Yeah. This is what happens with traumatic brain injuries sometimes. You're on a certain brain process and then all of a sudden, whoop.
How about live TV? I had 11 things I wanted to say. I got about, in the early conversation, I think I got about 7 or 8 of them, and the other 3 are long gone.
Okay, okay.
But we got around them. Oh, you got it again, right?
I got it again. Okay. So Mitch was saying you have to become your own therapist. And the talk we're doing is how to get the most out of your therapist. Well, that also involves getting the most out of yourself. If you're your own therapist, you need to learn how to get the most out of yourself. And there's obviously different ways. But one thing I would recommend is shoot video of yourself. Document maybe therapy sessions with some video. If the therapist is talking about something, there's no way you're going to remember most of it. Ask them if you can videotape that for your own memory, because you might go back to it 6 months from now and be like, wow, I'm really getting something out of this, and it's really going to help me, because it might be something that the therapist sees at that point in time that will be very beneficial, but you might not be able to see it at that particular moment. But it'll make a lot more sense as you develop the understanding that Mitch was referring to. And then you have this log, if you will, to be able to go back and revisit these therapy sessions, and it'll spark different parts of our brain. And that's really another way I feel to get the most out of your therapist and yourself as a therapist.
That's extremely valuable, John. You and I did not have that. Like you were TBI, I had stroke. We had those big honking VHS cameras that we weren't going to ask our parents to haul that into the therapy room. But now we can do it on a phone, have a caregiver or a therapist, do a video clippets of what we're supposed to do. I have done that recently with a therapist. Actually, 3 years ago, I saw a therapist for myself, and she was teaching me some new things. And I'm a visual learner, so I had her videotape either herself or me doing it correctly, and that helped out a great deal. And I did see progress looking back. I mean, it's 100% true. We have this technology. Why don't we use it?
Mm-hmm. And I think.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Sure. I see patients getting depressed. Oh, I'm not making progress, or this didn't change. This didn't change. And I've been in a couple situations where I have been able to videotape somewhat and give the patients videotape. Some clinics don't allow you to do that. And then when people look back at this video and they're like, oh, I haven't made any progress. And then they look back and they're like, oh, okay, but we
Yeah.
don't really remember it. It's like
Right.
trying to remember what you did, how you moved last week when you were learning to play baseball. You're not going to remember that.
Well, and the video guide has no video of his recovery until it was recovered, until I started teaching other people how to recover. That's because you think a VHS camera is a big honking thing. You ought to see my broadcast camera.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the other thing I was going to say was, John just said basically you can't watch your own hair go gray. You get up every morning and you comb your hair in the mirror. You do it every day for 6 months, and you see somebody who hasn't seen you in 6 months, and they go, "Wow, your hair turned gray." So those if you're too close to something, you can't see the progress. So those videos of those logs, I mean, you can do it with pictures too. You can just even take still pictures in terms of progress. It's better in terms of therapy, because John, you were saying 6 months later, you might understand how something fit in a lot better than you did in the early days by looking at a video recording. You might have progressed to where you're putting together the pieces and you realize that's a piece you didn't understand and you know where it goes. Kind of like putting a jigsaw puzzle together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think we covered all the bases, guys, or at least most of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it was a great conversation, and thanks to both of you. And maybe we should keep doing these. The three of us seem to hit on a lot of important topics and have different and interesting perspectives that we can bring. And hopefully all of you out there in YouTube land got a lot out of this. So
yeah,
thanks.
And and not to interrupt, but
No, go ahead.
I invite people to make comments and write down comments and utilize us as therapists. How do you get the most out of therapist or your therapist? Well, how do you get the most out of us? How can we help you? Because obviously we're taking our time out of our days because we want to pay it forward. We know there's a genuine interest and there's a genuine need. And as clinicians, we want to help people. We thank Ralph for letting this happen and enabling this to happen and making it happen, because there's work that goes into it. And so by survivors providing feedback, we can even make it better. I guess that's
So
the
if you
bottom
got
line.
anything to say, put it in the comments underneath this video. And I would say interact with your therapist is really important. I mean, we talked about what high levels of interaction. I took somebody twice a week for a year. That's 100 visits to therapy. It was through community service pro bono, so he didn't run out of insurance. And I don't think he asked a single question in 100 visits. So you shouldn't be interrupting your therapist when they're teaching you something, but when they're engaging you, you should be talking. It should be a 50-50 conversation or somewhere close to it, not sitting there like a bump on them. So, Mitch, you got anything else before I thank you guys and close this out?
Just, one other thing, email sometimes can be a nice communication. Like if you have questions and you don't want to forget the question, you can ask if you can share an email with your therapist, and then they can think about it, have time to think about that question and integrate it into the next session. So email is a great tool as well.
Great idea. I found that therapists typically, because they're so busy and the way the whole thing works, they tend to answer your questions in the next therapy session as opposed to getting a email repartee going. But that is a great idea. Plant a seed for the next visit. So guess with that, I want to thank both you, Mitch, and you, John, for your time. I think this is real valuable. And like I said, maybe we should come up with another topic and do it again.
All right. Thanks,
Excellent.
Ralph. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Do all you can with what you have, in the time you have, in the place you are. Do all you can. do all you can.